The sun shone brightly over Riverside Gardens that Saturday afternoon. The park looked its absolute best, with flowers in full bloom and the river glistening under the warm summer light. James and Kiana couldn't have asked for better weather for their wedding day. After dating for 5 years and being engaged for 1, today was finally the day they would become husband and wife. James woke up early that morning, too excited to sleep. He stood by the window of his hotel room, looking out at the city he had served as mayor for 3 terms now. It was a mid-sized town with its share of problems and strengths like any other place, but it was home, and he had worked hard to make it better for everyone who lived there. "You ready for the big day?" asked Thomas, James's brother and best man, who was adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Been ready for years," James replied with a smile. "Just wish Mom and Dad could have been here to see it." Thomas walked over and put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "They're watching from somewhere, I'm sure of it. And they'd be so proud of you, not just for today, but for everything you've accomplished." James nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. His parents had passed away before he was elected mayor, but their lessons about perseverance and dignity had guided him through every campaign and every challenge in office. "We kept it small, just like we wanted," James said, changing the subject. "No fancy announcements, no press, no politics. Today isn't about being the mayor." "Good luck with that," Thomas laughed. "You know how people are. You can't go anywhere in this town without someone wanting to talk policy or potholes." "Not today," James insisted. "Today I'm just a guy marrying the love of his life." Across town, Kiana was getting ready with her sister Lisa and her 2 closest friends. Her wedding dress wasn't extravagant, but was elegant in its simplicity, a flowing white gown with delicate beadwork that caught the light when she moved. "You look absolutely perfect," Lisa said, adjusting the small flowers woven into Kiana's hair. "James is going to lose it when he sees you." Kiana took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "I still can't believe we pulled this off without it turning into some political event. No reporters, no city council members giving speeches. That's because you 2 planned everything yourselves and kept it quiet," her friend Renee pointed out. "Smart move." "We just wanted something real," Kiana explained. "James deals with enough formality in his daily life. Our wedding should be about us, not about his position." The bridal party arrived at Riverside Gardens an hour before the ceremony. The setup was simple but beautiful. White chairs arranged in rows facing the river, with an arch made of local flowers marking where the couple would stand. James had made sure they had all the proper permits, paying the fees himself rather than using any mayoral privilege. Everything was by the book. As guests began to arrive, about 50 close friends and family members, James greeted them personally, hugging old friends and thanking everyone for coming. Nobody addressed him as Mayor Wilson today, and that's exactly how he wanted it. "Nervous?" asked Thomas as the time grew closer. "Not even a little," James replied truthfully. "Marrying Kiana is the easiest decision I've ever made." The string quartet began playing, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests took their seats as James and the officiant, an old college friend who had gotten certified just for this occasion, took their places under the floral arch. First came Lisa, walking slowly down the aisle in a deep blue dress, followed by Renee, and then Kiana's other bridesmaid. Thomas stood beside James, giving him an encouraging nod. And then, as the music shifted to the traditional wedding march, everyone stood and turned. Kiana appeared at the end of the aisle, escorted by her uncle. James felt his breath catch at the sight of her. She looked radiant, her smile brighter than the sunshine that surrounded them. As she walked slowly toward him, James felt as though time itself had slowed down, just to let him savor this moment. When she reached him and took his hands, he whispered, "You're so beautiful." A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. "Don't you dare make me cry before we even start," she whispered back, squeezing his hands. The guests sat down as the officiant welcomed everyone. "We are gathered here today in this beautiful spot to witness the union of James and Kiana, 2 people whose love story has been an inspiration to everyone who knows them." He spoke about how they had met at a community cleanup event, neither of them looking for love but finding it anyway. James couldn't take his eyes off Kiana as the officiant continued. The day felt perfect. The gentle breeze, the sound of the river nearby, birds singing in the trees that surrounded the garden. They had chosen this public park deliberately, a place that belonged to everyone in the community rather than an exclusive venue. James and Kiana have written their own vows, the officiant announced, but before we get to that part of our ceremony, that's when they heard the voice, loud, intrusive, and decidedly angry. Hey, what's going on here? You can't just take over a public park like this. James felt Kiana's hands tighten around his as they both turned toward the source of the interruption. Walking purposefully toward their gathering was a middle-aged white man wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt, his face flushed with what appeared to be indignation. The perfect day they had planned so carefully was about to take an unexpected turn. The man strode right up to the edge of the seated guests, his posture stiff with self-importance. A few people turned in their chairs, confused expressions on their faces. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note, the sudden silence making the interruption even more jarring. "Excuse me," the man said loudly, not sounding apologetic at all. "This is a public park. You can't just rope off areas and hold private events without proper authorization." James felt a rush of emotions, disbelief, embarrassment, and a slow-building anger he fought to contain. From the corner of his eye, he could see Kiana's uncle half rising from his seat, ready to intervene. Several other guests shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," the officiant said, trying to defuse the situation. "We're in the middle of a wedding ceremony." "I don't care what you're in the middle of," the man replied, his voice getting louder. "There are rules about using public spaces. I walk here every Saturday and suddenly I'm supposed to go around because someone decided to throw a party?" Kiana squeezed James's hand again, this time in a silent plea for calm. He squeezed back, understanding her concern. As the only black mayor in the town's history, James had learned to be careful about how he responded to confrontations. A wrong move, an angry word, anything could become tomorrow's headline. "We won? Have the proper permits," Thomas said, stepping forward slightly. "Everything's been approved through the Parks Department," the man scoffed. "Sure you do." His eyes swept across the gathering, taking in the predominantly black guests in their formal attire. "And I'm supposed to just take your word for it?" A murmur ran through the crowd. An older woman in the second row whispered something that sounded like, "Not today of all days." James's cousin Robert, always quick to anger, was now standing up, his wife tugging at his sleeve to get him to sit back down. "Look," the man continued, seemingly encouraged by the disruption he was causing. "I pay taxes in this town. I know the mayor personally, and he wouldn't just let people take over public spaces without going through proper channels." At this, James felt Kiana's hand tighten on his again, but this time he detected a hint of amusement mixed with her tension. Her eyes met his, and despite everything, a small smile played at the corner of her lips. The man wasn't done. "If you have permits, I want to see them right now. Otherwise, you need to pack up and move along. There are plenty of private venues where you could hold this kind of thing." The "this kind of thing" hung in the air, loaded with implications that everyone present could feel. Thomas looked like he was about to argue further, but James gave a slight shake of his head. This was his wedding day, and he wasn't about to let someone else control how it unfolded. Especially not someone claiming to know the mayor personally. "Can you believe this guy?" one of the bridesmaids whispered, just loudly enough to be heard. The man crossed his arms and tapped his foot impatiently. "I'm waiting. Either show me the permits or start packing up." James took a deep breath and turned to Kiana. "I'm sorry about this," he said softly. "Don't be," she whispered back. "Just handle it how you always do." With a gentle squeeze of her hand, James turned away from his bride to face the intruder. He stepped forward, still in his perfectly tailored wedding suit, his expression calm but firm. "Sir," James began, his voice steady and measured. "First of all, I want to point out that you're interrupting a very special moment in our lives." He gestured between himself and Kiana. "I understand that," the man said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But rules are rules." "I agree completely," James said with a nod. "Rules are indeed rules. and we've followed every single one of them." He maintained eye contact with the man, who seemed slightly taken aback by James's composed demeanor. "Well, then you won't mind showing me these supposed permits?" the man challenged, emphasizing the word supposed in a way that made several guests shift angrily in their seats. "The permits are with the park ranger's office, filed properly with the city," James explained. "We paid the fee, went through the application process, and received approval weeks ago." The man let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Right, and I'm just supposed to believe that? For all I know, you people just showed up today and decided to take over." The phrase "you people" caused another ripple through the crowd. Robert was now fully standing, despite his wife's attempts to keep him seated. Thomas had moved to James's side, a silent show of support. "Actually," the man continued, warming to his subject, "I'm going to call the mayor's office right now. Mayor Wilson is a personal friend of mine. We play golf together. He'll clear this up right away." At this, Kiana couldn't suppress a small laugh, quickly covering her mouth with her hand. Her sister Lisa was openly rolling her eyes. Even the officiant looked like he was fighting a smile. The man pulled out his phone, making a show of scrolling through his contacts. "I've got his direct number right here. We'll see what the mayor has to say about this unauthorized gathering." James looked back at Kiana, who gave him a small nod as if to say, "Go ahead." "That won't be necessary," James said, turning back to the man. "Oh?" The man looked up from his phone with a smug expression. "Changed your mind about those permits?" "No," James replied calmly, "but I do think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension, "is that you thought you could get away with this. The mayor is very particular about how public spaces are used. He and I have discussed it many times." Several guests couldn't hold back their laughter now, which only seemed to irritate the man further. "What's so funny?" he demanded, looking around at the amused faces. "Sir," James said, reaching into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, "I think it's time we cleared this up." The entire gathering had gone quiet, watching the exchange with rapt attention. What had started as an unwelcome interruption had now become the unexpected main event of the ceremony. Kiana had moved forward to stand beside James. Her hand slipped through his arm in a gesture of unity. "The thing is," James continued, pulling something from his pocket, "I'd really like to get back to marrying the love of my life." "Not until you show me those permits," the man insisted. "How about I show you this instead?" James said, holding out a small leather wallet that he flipped open to reveal an official identification card with the city seal prominently displayed. The man leaned forward to read it, confusion evident on his face as he processed what he was seeing. The man's eyes widened as he read the ID card in front of him. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The color drained from his face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. "Mayor James Wilson," he read aloud, his voice now barely above a whisper. A ripple of satisfied chuckles spread through the wedding guests. Thomas didn't bother hiding his grin. Kiana's uncle, who had been ready to intervene just moments before, sat back in his chair with a look of pure satisfaction. "That's correct," James said, keeping his voice level despite the temptation to enjoy the man's discomfort. "I'm Mayor Wilson, though today I'd prefer to just be James, a guy trying to get married." The man stared at the ID, then at James's face, then back at the ID, as if trying to reconcile the two. But you're the mayor?" James offered, saving the man from saying what was really on his mind. "Yes, for 3 terms now. But we've never met," the man said, confusion evident in his voice. "You said we play golf together." "I never said that," James corrected him gently. "You said it. I've never played golf with you. In fact, I don't play golf at all. I'm more of a basketball person myself." The crowd's amusement grew more obvious. Someone in the back row muttered, "Man doesn't even know what his own mayor looks like," which caused several people to nod in agreement. The man's embarrassment was now complete, his face flushing red in stark contrast to its previous pallor. He looked around at the crowd, seeming to fully register for the first time that he had interrupted the wedding of the town's mayor, a man he claimed to know personally, but clearly had never met. "I don't understand," he stammered. "I've lived here for 7 years. How could I not know?" James put the ID back in his pocket. 7 years? That's interesting. "I've been mayor for 8, Kiana stepped forward. "Maybe you don't attend the town halls? James holds them monthly." Her voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, the slight hint of accusation not lost on anyone present. "I've been busy," the man said weakly. "Work and things." "Too busy to know who leads your town, apparently," Thomas added, not quite under his breath. James gave his brother a look that said, "Enough," before turning back to the man. "As for those permits you were concerned about, they were indeed filed properly. I delegated the paperwork to my assistant to avoid any appearance of special treatment. We paid the standard fee like anyone else would." The man nodded numbly, clearly struggling to find a graceful exit from the situation he had created. Of course, I'm sure everything is in order." "It is," James confirmed. "Now, if you don't mind, my fiancé and I would like to get back to our wedding." Yes, of course," the man said quickly. I should go." He started to turn away, then paused, apparently feeling that something more was required. "I'm sorry for the interruption. I didn't know who you were." The implication of those words hung in the air. Would he have behaved differently if he had known he was confronting the mayor? Almost certainly. Would he have approached a white couple with the same aggressive assumption of wrongdoing? The unspoken question was on everyone's mind. James felt Kiana's hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that reminded him of what today was supposed to be about. Not about confronting prejudice or educating the ignorant. They dealt with enough of that in their daily lives. Today was supposed to be about love, about commitment, about starting their life together officially. Yet James also knew that moments like these were precisely why his position as mayor mattered. Representation mattered. Being visible mattered. The fact that this man could live in their town for 7 years and somehow never register that his mayor was a black man, that said something about how segregated people's lives could be even in the same community. "I appreciate your apology," James said finally. "But I want to be clear about something. The issue isn't that you didn't know who I was. The issue is how quickly you assumed we didn't belong here, that we hadn't followed the rules. That's something worth reflecting on." The man looked down at his shoes, unable to meet James's steady gaze. "I understand," he said quietly, though whether he truly did was debatable. A few seconds of uncomfortable silence followed. The man shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly wanting to leave but unsure how to do so without making the situation even more awkward. It was Kiana who broke the tension. "Would you like to stay for the ceremony?" she asked, surprising everyone, including James. "There's room in the back row." The invitation was more than a kind gesture. It was a challenge. Stay and witness something you tried to stop. See us as people celebrating love, not as intruders to be confronted. The man looked up, startled by the offer. No, thank you. I should get going. Again, I'm sorry for interrupting." With that, he turned and walked quickly away down the park path, his shoulders hunched, occasionally glancing back as if worried someone might follow him. As he disappeared around a bend in the path, the tension that had built up during the confrontation seemed to dissolve. Several people exhaled audibly. Thomas clapped James on the shoulder. "Always the diplomat, little brother." James turned back to Kiana, taking both her hands in his. "I'm sorry about that." "Don't be," she said firmly. "It's not your fault." "No, but it's not how I wanted our wedding to go." She smiled at him, a smile filled with understanding and love. "Our wedding is going exactly how it should. It's real, it's us. And that means dealing with the world as it is, not just as we wish it could be." James felt a surge of love for this woman who understood so perfectly why he had run for mayor in the first place. Not for power or prestige, but to help create a world where incidents like the one they had just experienced would become less common, where everyone would feel they belonged. "Shall we continue?" the officiant asked, looking between James and Kiana. They both nodded, turning back to face each other under the floral arch. The string quartet, taking their cue, began to play again. The ceremony resumed, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. What had happened wasn't just an unfortunate interruption. It had inadvertently highlighted exactly why their union, their love, their visibility in the community mattered so much. As the officiant began to speak again about love and commitment, James looked into Kiana's eyes and saw in them not just affection, but fierce determination. A quality he had admired in her from the day they met. They were partners in every sense of the word, facing life's challenges together, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating joys large and small. The ceremony continued with the exchange of vows. James had spent weeks working on his. wanting to get the words just right. But now, in the aftermath of what had happened, the carefully prepared speech seemed insufficient. He took a deep breath and decided to speak from the heart instead. "Kiana," James began, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "I had a whole speech prepared for this moment. Word. So I've been refining for weeks, trying to capture exactly what you mean to me." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "But after what just happened, I realized that sometimes the most important things can't be rehearsed. They have to be lived." The guests were silent, hanging on his every word. Even those who had been upset by the interruption were now fully present in this moment. "When I first ran for mayor," James continued, "you asked me why I wanted the job. Remember what I said?" Kiana nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You said you wanted to be the person you needed to see when you were growing up." "Exactly," James said with a smile. "I wanted kids who looked like me to see that they could lead, that they belonged in every space, that their dreams weren't limited by other people's expectations." He took a breath. "But what I didn't tell you then, what I came to realize later, was that none of it would mean anything without someone to share it with. Someone who understood the burden of being visible and the responsibility that comes with it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. Many of them had supported James through his campaigns, had celebrated his victories and commiserated over his challenges. "You've never asked me to be less than I am," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "When critics said I was too ambitious, when supporters wanted me to be more cautious, when friends suggested I compromise, you always pushed me to be authentic, to stand firm in my convictions." Kiana squeezed his hands, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. "What we just experienced," James continued, gesturing vaguely in the direction the man had gone. "That's why this matters. Our love, our partnership, our visibility, it all matters. When we stand together, we show the world what's possible." He reached up to gently wipe away Kiana's tear. "So my vow to you today is this. I will love you fiercely and without reservation. I will support your dreams with the same passion you've supported mine. I will stand beside you through whatever challenges come our way, and I will never take for granted the strength it takes to be who we are, where we are, how we are." By now, several guests were openly wiping away tears. Thomas clapped a hand on his brother's shoulder, a gesture of pride and support. Kiana took a moment to compose herself before beginning her own vows. "James," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her emotion, "when we met at that community cleanup event 5 years ago, I had no idea I was meeting the future mayor. I just thought you were a cute guy who cared about the neighborhood." This drew gentle laughter from the crowd, lightening the mood slightly. "I fell in love with you long before you ran for office," she continued. "I fell in love with your kindness, your integrity, your unwavering belief that things can be better if good people are willing to work for change." She paused, glancing briefly at their guests before returning her gaze to James. "When you decided to run for mayor, I knew what it would mean for us. The scrutiny, the criticism, the weight of being firsts in so many contexts. I knew there would be days like today when someone would look at us and see not who we are, but what we represent." James nodded, understanding completely what she meant. "But I also knew that standing beside you would be the greatest honor of my life," Kiana said. "Not because of your title, but because of your heart. Because you fight for what's right even when it's difficult. Because you lead with compassion and listen more than you speak. Because you never forget where you came from and who you're serving." She took a deep breath. "So today I vow to continue being your partner in all things, to support you when the burden seems too heavy, to celebrate with you when there's cause for joy, to remind you of your purpose when doubt creeps in, to love you completely, in public and in private, in victory and in setback, in all the moments that make up a life together." The officiant, clearly moved by the exchange, took a moment before continuing with the ceremony. "James and Kiana have chosen to exchange rings as symbols of their commitment," he announced. Thomas stepped forward, handing James a simple but elegant gold band. Lisa did the same for Kiana. As they exchanged rings, the significance of the circular shape, no beginning, no end, seemed particularly poignant. Their commitment wasn't just to each other, but to everything they represented together. Resilience, dignity, hope. "By the power vested in me," the officiant said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He smiled warmly at the couple. "Mayor Wilson, you may kiss your bride." The gathered friends and family erupted in applause as James and Kiana shared their first kiss as a married couple. The sound echoed across the park, drawing curious glances from passers-by, some of whom stopped to witness the joyful moment. As they turned to face their guests, hand in hand, James felt a profound sense of rightness. The interruption that could have ruined their day had instead transformed it, making their vows more meaningful, their commitment more deliberate. The string quartet began playing again as James and Kiana made their way back down the aisle, now as husband and wife. Guests threw flower petals in their path, creating a colorful carpet for their first steps into married life. The reception was set up in another area of the park, under a canopy of trees strung with soft lights. As people made their way over, the mood was celebratory but also reflective. Conversations naturally turned to what had happened during the ceremony. "Did you see his face when he realized?" one guest asked another, laughing. "I thought he was going to faint right there." 7 years in this town and never bothered to know who the mayor was," another replied, shaking their head. "Makes you wonder. That's why James's work is so important," said an older woman, Kiana's former teacher. "Visibility matters. Representation matters." James and Kiana moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Despite the earlier confrontation, or perhaps because of it, there was a special energy to the gathering, a sense that they had all witnessed something important. Thomas tapped a spoon against his champagne glass, calling for everyone's attention. As the best man, it was his duty to give the first toast. The chatter died down as people turned to listen. "To my little brother and his amazing wife," Thomas began, raising his glass. Today didn't go exactly as planned. This drew knowing laughter from the crowd. But then again, he continued, "Nothing about James's journey has ever been predictable. When he told me he was running for mayor 8 years ago, I thought he was crazy. No one's going to elect a 28-year-old with no political experience," I told him. James laughed, remembering the conversation well. "But James has always had a way of proving people wrong," Thomas said, his voice full of pride. "He doesn't do it with arguments or confrontation. He does it by being so undeniably good at what he does that people can't ignore him." He turned to look directly at his brother and new sister-in-law. "What we witnessed today, that moment of reckoning when someone had to face their own assumptions, that's what change looks like. It's uncomfortable. It's necessary. And it only happens when people like James and Kiana refuse to be invisible." He raised his glass higher. "So here's to the happy couple. May your marriage be as strong as your convictions and as beautiful as your vision for the future." "Hear, hear," called several guests, raising their own glasses. As the reception continued, with food and dancing and all the traditional celebrations, James found a quiet moment to pull Kiana aside. "Away from the crowd, thank you," he said softly, holding both her hands in his. "For what?" she asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew. "For understanding that being mayor isn't just a job for me. For seeing that moments like today aren't just inconveniences, they're reminders of why we do what we do." Kiana leaned in to kiss him gently. "That's why we work so well together. I don't just support what you do, I believe in it too." The reception continued well into the evening, the string lights overhead creating a magical atmosphere as darkness fell. The DJ had everyone on their feet, from the youngest cousins to Kiana's 82-year-old grandmother, who surprised everyone with her still impressive dance moves. For hours, the earlier interruption seemed forgotten as the celebration took center stage. Around 9 o'clock, just as the cake had been cut and served, James noticed a familiar figure hovering at the edge of the reception area. It was the man from earlier, standing awkwardly near a tree, clearly unsure whether to approach or leave. James excused himself from the conversation he was having with Kiana's uncle and walked over to the man, who looked startled when he realized the mayor was heading directly toward him. "You came back," James observed, his tone neutral. The man nodded, his discomfort evident. I wanted to apologize properly. What I did earlier was inexcusable." James studied him for a moment. The man looked different now, humbled, genuinely remorseful. "I appreciate that," James said finally. "What's your name?" "David," the man replied. "David Hoffman. I live over on Maple Street," James nodded. "The renovated Victorian with the blue trim?" David looked surprised. "Yes, that's right. How did you know?" I make it my business to know the town, James said simply. All of it, not just the parts where people who look like me live. David had the grace to look embarrassed. That's part of why I came back. What you said earlier, about me assuming you didn't belong there, about not knowing who my own mayor was for 7 years. It made me realize how limited my perspective has been. James didn't immediately respond, giving David space to continue. I've been thinking all day about how quickly I jumped to conclusions, David went on. And not just today. It's a pattern, isn't it? Making assumptions about people based on, well, I do know, James confirmed. But I'm glad to hear you recognizing it. That's usually the hardest part. David shifted uncomfortably. I brought something, he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It's not much, but he held it out to James. It's a wedding gift and an apology. James accepted the envelope but didn't open it. Thank you. I'll share this with Kiana later. I should go, David said, glancing toward the reception where people were still dancing. I don't want to intrude any more than I already have. James was about to agree when he saw Kiana walking toward them, curiosity evident on her face. He waited for her to join them. You remember David, James said as she arrived at his side. He came to apologize and bring us a wedding gift. Kiana regarded David with a measured look. That was thoughtful of you. David nodded awkwardly. I'm truly sorry for ruining your ceremony. You didn't ruin it, Kiana said firmly. You interrupted it. There's a difference. Our day wasn't defined by that moment, it was just part of our story now. David seemed relieved by her response. I should leave you to your celebration. Actually, James said, making a decision, why don't you join us for a few minutes? There's something I want to show you. David looked shocked by the invitation. Oh, I couldn't possibly. It's not an imposition, James assured him. It's an opportunity for all of us. With that, James led both Kiana and David back to the reception area. Some guests noticed David's return and whispers quickly spread through the gathering. Thomas approached, a questioning look on his face. It's okay, James told his brother quietly. I've got this. James guided David to a table where photo albums had been set up, a display of both his and Kiana's families through the generations. He picked up one particular album and opened it to a specific page. This was my grandfather, James explained, pointing to a black and white photograph of a dignified older man in a work uniform. He moved to this town in 1952, one of the first black families in what was then an all-white neighborhood. He worked at the manufacturing plant on the east side for 38 years. David leaned in to look at the photograph, his expression serious. The neighbors started a petition to keep him out, James continued. They were concerned about property values, they said, about changing the character of the neighborhood. But my grandfather didn't leave. He stayed, worked hard, raised his family. Eventually, he even became friends with some of those same neighbors. James turned to the next page, showing a group photo of workers outside the plant. That's him there, he said, pointing. And that's Mr. Reynolds next to him, the man who started the petition. They ended up carpooling together for 15 years. David looked up from the photo to meet James's eyes. Why are you showing me this? Because progress isn't linear, James replied. It happens in fits and starts. It happens when people are willing to reconsider their first reactions, to see each other as individuals instead of categories. Kiana picked up another album. And this is my great-aunt Ruby, she said, showing David a photo of a young woman in a nurse's uniform. She was the first black nurse at County General Hospital. The other nurses refused to work with her at first. By the time she retired 40 years later, she was the head of nursing, and those same women were at her retirement party. David nodded slowly, beginning to understand what they were sharing with him. You're saying people can change? They can, James confirmed. If they want to. If they're willing to do the uncomfortable work of examining their own thinking. Like showing up at a stranger's wedding reception to admit you were wrong, Kiana added with a small smile. Around them, the party continued. Some guests had noticed the unusual conversation happening, but respected the space around it. This was James and Kiana's way, turning difficult moments into opportunities for connection and growth. I don't know what to say, David admitted. Except thank you for taking the time to talk to me when you have every reason not to. Being mayor isn't just about policy decisions and ribbon cuttings, James told him. It's about building community, real community, where people see each other as neighbors, not strangers or threats, and sometimes, Kiana added, that means having uncomfortable conversations. I'd like to do better, David said after a moment. I'd like to be more aware of my community. All of it, James nodded approvingly. The town hall meetings are the first Tuesday of every month, 7 o'clock at the Civic Center. Consider this a personal invitation. I'll be there, David promised. He extended his hand to James, who shook it firmly. As David turned to leave, he stopped and looked back. Congratulations, by the way, on your marriage. Thank you, James and Kiana said in unison. They watched as David made his way out of the reception area. His posture different now, less defensive, more thoughtful. Thomas approached as soon as David was out of earshot. What was that about? He asked, looking concerned. That, James said with a small smile, was what leadership looks like. Not just in the office or at official functions, but in everyday moments when it would be easier to hold on to anger than to build a bridge. Thomas shook his head in amazement. On your wedding day, you're still being the mayor. No, Kiana corrected him. He's being James. The mayor is just one part of who he is. She looked at her new husband with pride. It's his heart that makes him good at his job, not the other way around. The DJ's voice came over the speakers then, announcing the last dance of the evening. James took Kiana's hand and led her to the center of the dance floor. As they swayed together to a slow ballad, their guests forming a circle around them, James leaned down to whisper in her ear. Thank you for understanding. Always, she whispered back. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. You see the potential in every situation, even the difficult ones. James pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Do you think he'll actually come to a town hall meeting? I don't know, Kiana admitted. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is that you offered the opportunity for change instead of shutting the door on it. James nodded, thinking about the long line of people who had made his life possible. His grandfather who refused to be driven away, his parents who taught him to stand tall in the face of prejudice, the mentors who encouraged him to run for office despite the odds. Each of them had, in their own way, created space for progress to happen, sometimes in the most unlikely moments. As the song ended, James dipped Kiana dramatically, causing their guests to cheer and applaud. The photographer captured the moment, their joyful expressions, the sparkling lights above, the circle of loved ones surrounding them. Later that night, back in their hotel suite, James finally remembered to open the envelope David had given them. Inside was a simple card with a handwritten note. Mayor and Mrs. Wilson, I offer my sincere apologies for my behavior today. What I did was inexcusable. In reflection, I realize how much I've isolated myself from the community I claim to care about. Please accept this donation to the Youth Center renovation project, which I read about in last week's paper, as a small step toward being a better neighbor and citizen. With respect and regret, David Hoffman. Enclosed with the note was a check for $5,000. James showed it to Kiana, who read it with raised eyebrows. Well, she said finally, that's quite an apology. The youth center can certainly use it, James agreed, setting the card on the bedside table. Maybe something good came out of today's disruption after all. Kiana sat beside him on the edge of the bed. A lot of good came out of today, she corrected him. We got married. We celebrated with people we love. And yes, we turned what could have been just an ugly incident into something meaningful. James leaned over to kiss her softly. Mrs. Mayer, he said with a smile. That's Dr. Mrs. Mayer to you, she corrected him, laughing. Kiana had earned her PhD in education policy the previous year, a fact James never tired of mentioning with pride. As they settled into bed that night, their wedding day behi, and them and their married life ahead, James thought about the path that had brought them to this point, the challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, the moments, like today's confrontation, that had tested their resilience. He also thought about the community they were building together, not just through his work as mayor or her work in education, but through small interactions like the one with David. The daily choices to respond with dignity rather than defensiveness, to offer understanding rather than indignation, to create space for growth rather than reinforcing divisions. Those choices weren't always easy. They weren't always rewarded. But they were, James believed, the only way forward, For themselves, for their future children, for the town they both loved. What are you thinking about? Kiana asked sleepily, curled against his side. About how every moment is a choice, he replied, and how glad I am that you're the person I get to make those choices with for the rest of my life. She smiled, her eyes already closing. Good answer, Mr. Mayor, good answer. As James drifted toward sleep, he felt a profound sense of peace. Their wedding day hadn't gone exactly as planned, but in some ways it had been better, more authentic, more meaningful, more representative of the life they had chosen together. A life of purpose and challenge, of joy and struggle, of small moments that sometimes carried the seeds of big changes. Tomorrow, they would leave for their honeymoon, 2 weeks away from responsibilities and roles. Just James and Kiana enjoying each other's company on a Caribbean beach. But they would carry with them the lessons of today, that their love was not just personal but powerful, that their visibility mattered, and that sometimes the most important kind of leadership happened not in grand gestures but in quiet moments of grace.